Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we've got a really fascinating stack of sources that look at a connection you might not expect. High-quality lipids and a Pilates practice.
It's a deep dive into physiological coherence, really. The sources are tackling an idea that, well, it seems to fly in the face of the usual fitness narrative.
Right.
We're exploring the idea that a high-quality targeted fat intake isn't just compatible with Pilates, it's almost essential for its core principles, that precision and control is physically, well, almost impossible without the right structural nourishment.
And that's the central tension, isn't it? The word fat still brings up all these signals of, drag, excess, poor performance.
Exactly.
So our mission today is to unpack how these sources just completely reframe lipids, not as a threat, but as the literal architecture of life.
Yes. The starting point for this whole deep dive is that we have to abandon the moral debate around dietary fat. Physiologically, the sources are crystal clear. Lipids are structural. They form a partnership with mindful movement.
A partnership designed to create support and reduce what the source material calls internal noise.
That's it.
Okay, I want to start right there. With the architecture, why do the sources insist we have to focus purely on the physiological side of things? What are these undeniable roles?
Well, because their rules go so far beyond just energy storage, we have to understand that we are eating building materials. The sources, they detail 4 essential architectural roles.
Okay.
First, they're the raw material for every single cellular membrane in your body. They directly dictate how flexible, how permeable, how responsive your cells can be.
So the quality of the communication equipment, it starts with the quality of the building materials. If you're eating, say, low-quality processed fats, you're literally building shoddy walls for all your cells.
Precisely. Second, they form the myelin sheaths that insulate every nerve pathway.
The insulation.
Yeah, think of myelin as the rubber coating around a copper wire. That insulation is absolutely crucial for clean, fast, undegraded signal transmission through the whole nervous system.
And without that clean signal, good luck finding your deep core muscles, right?
It becomes much harder. Third, lipids are precursors for vital steroid hormones. Things like vitamin D, crucial sex hormones, which impact everything, mood, bone density, recovery.
Everything.
And fourth, they're the transport vehicle. They're necessary for carrying essential fat-soluble vitamins, your A, D, E, and K.
That focus on the nervous system, that really sharpens things for me. So if quality lipids are basically the support staff for neurological health, how does that directly enhance a practice like Pilates, which, at its core is neuromuscular education?
That is the crux of the entire argument in the material. A muscle is, for all intents and purposes, useless without a high-quality, clear nerve message telling it exactly what to do.
Right.
And the essence of Pilates isn't brute force. It's not about maximum contraction. It's the sophisticated, continuous dialogue between your motor cortex, your proprioception,
Your sense of self in space.
your sense of self in space,
Yeah.
exactly, your respiratory rhythm, and then the muscular response.
So we're essentially moving the source of control away from just raw strength and into this high-definition internal communication system.
Yes. And that high-definition communication, it requires optimal biological conditions. So by supporting the right lipid environment, you are directly optimizing the quality of your neuronal membranes, your synaptic fluidity. You're ensuring the rapid, efficient conduction of those action potentials.
So precision, control, the ability to feel a tiny adjustment. It all depends on this internal communication being, crisp and uninterrupted.
That's the perfect word for it, crisp.
Okay, so that's the ideal scenario.
Yeah.
But what did the sources say happens when the system is starved of that quality support? This is where that idea of internal noise comes in.
And this internal noise, it's not just a mental distraction. The sources suggest it's a physical state. When the body is in a state of chronic inflammation, often from, poor quality fats and that relentless roller coaster of high sugar and insulin spikes, that stable base is just destroyed. These physiological stresses, they destabilize your attention, they compromise your emotional state, and they just wreck your cognitive availability.
And anyone who's tried to do the 100 or, articulate a complex movement while battling brain fog or low blood sugar knows that feeling. It's so frustrating because it feels like a failure of willpower.
But that's the key observation from practitioners in the field. Some students are, as they put it, physiologically saturated. They're internally noisy.
So they struggle not from a lack of effort.
Not at all. It's because of an internal physiological overload. The big takeaway is that your nutrition has to serve your inner availability. You need a calm, stable physiological base, a quiet background signal, to succeed in a method that is built on observation and nuance.
That is such a critical point. So if the goal is maximizing this inner availability, what does a targeted lipid diet actually look like? We have to go from the abstract idea to the actual plate.
Right. So targeted is really a two-part strategy here. The first part is the qualitative choice. This means immediately rejecting industrial unstable fats. We have to focus heavily on monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fatty acids, especially omega-3s.
So we're talking olive oil, fatty fish.
Extra virgin olive oil, fatty fish, flax seeds, chia seeds, nuts, avocado, and importantly, with moderation and quality in mind, high-quality animal fats. At the same time, you have to drastically reduce trans fats, all ultra-processed foods, and that really inflammatory combination of bad fat plus high sugar.
I get the quality part.
Yeah.
But I can still hear listeners thinking, I get the mechanism, but culturally, high fat still sounds slow,
No.
heavy, sluggish.
Yeah.
Doesn't that contradict the lightness and fluidity we're after in Pilates?
And that is a fantastic question. It's where the second part of the strategy, let's call it strategic context, becomes absolutely crucial. This is the difference between a real strategy and just, drifting into a dogma. You can't just jump into a high lipid approach overnight. It requires a careful, gradual adaptation. You have to respect your own digestive capacity, maybe monitor biological markers, and look at the rest of your health, sleep, stress, your metabolic history.
So the system has to adapt.
The system has to be adapted, and that adaptation process is what we call building metabolic flexibility.
Okay, let's nail that term down. For everyone listening, what is the clearest, most practical definition of metabolic flexibility?
Metabolic flexibility is your body's developed capacity to efficiently use different fuel sources, so glucose or lipids, depending on what it needs, without suffering.
Without the crash.
Without the crash. The key signs you're flexible are no mental fog, no sharp irritability, no sudden desperate need for sugar, just stable energy for sustained effort. You can switch between fuels seamlessly.
And what does that mean for someone in a 60-minute Pilates class?
It's a perfect match. A Pilates session, it's typically 45 to 60 minutes of sustained, controlled work. You're recruiting a lot of slow-twitch muscle fibers. You're working on postural endurance.
Not a sprint.
It's not a sprint at all. It's a highly technical, continuous effort, which aligns perfectly with that stable, slow-release energy you get from your fat reserves.
I love the analogy the sources use for this, the one comparing the energy stores.
Yeah, the analogy really helps ground the science. Glycogen is your fast but severely limited reserve. It's your instant sprint fuel, good for maybe 20 minutes of really hard effort.
Right.
Lipids, on the other hand, are the immense but slower reserve. That's your marathon fuel, hours of potential energy. Pilates is much more like a highly technical conscious walk, so that immense stable lipid reserve is the preferred fuel. But, and this is so important, your body has to be trained how to access it. It has to be taught how to open that reserve.
And that training, that's where the science terms fit in.
Right.
We're literally teaching our bodies to run the right biochemical machinery.
Exactly. When we talk about training the body to access that lipid reserve, we're talking about enhancing lipolysis, which is releasing the stored fatty acids, and improving beta oxidation, which is converting those fatty acids into usable energy inside your mitochondria.
So building metabolic flexibility is actually training your mitochondria to get better at their job.
You're training your mitochondria to run that process effectively. And it requires context, it requires oxygen, it requires hormonal stability. You have to get this. Simply eating fat doesn't automatically mean your body burns fat. The movement and the strategic context are what make the whole system work together.
Okay, let's get into some practical nuance. Pilates has mat work, which is deep organization, but then there's machine work reformer, Cadillac, which adds resistance, more local fatigue. Does that change the nutritional approach?
It definitely requires some calibration. Mat work often relies on long time, under tension, continuous awareness. Machine work, because it adds resistance, can create a much higher local metabolic demand, especially in intense sequences.
So that might burn through more of that quick fuel.
Exactly. That added intensity may increase the body's reliance on glycogen, especially if the sessions are frequent.
So the goal isn't to become carb phobic. It's about being strategic.
Precisely. The sources completely reject any all-or-nothing dogma. If you're doing several high-resistance reformer classes a week, a targeted lipid diet can still be very intelligent about carbs. Meaning quality carbohydrates like complex starches or fruit used strategically around those demanding sessions to top off that limited glycogen reserve. Pilates is a school of nuance, isn't it? finding the neutral, the micro adjustments. Your nutrition has to follow that same philosophy.
So what are the concrete, observable benefits that practitioners report when they make this shift? What actually changes in the studio?
We see changes across three main areas. First, energy. They report fewer afternoon fatigue slumps, much more stable energy throughout the entire class, and a huge reduction in sugar cravings and that irritability that comes with blood sugar crashes.
Okay, in the second area.
Second is the musculo-articular system. Better recovery times and, this is a big one, noticeably less diffuse, achy pain. And this is vital because the anti-inflammatory effects of high-quality fats, particularly the omega-3s, directly reduce that chronic low-grade inflammation.
Which is key for Pilates, since inflammation just creates tightness and compensation.
It's absolutely vital. Inflammation creates stiffness, it heightens nervous reactivity, and it forces the body into these protective compensation patterns, the exact opposite of the refined open alignment you're seeking in Pilates. When you bring in those inflammation-reducing mediators from omega-3s and you stabilize your blood sugar, you quiet that inflammatory noise, and that lets you access deeper muscle control.
One very practical question that's left is timing. Lipids slow down digestion.
Yeah.
So do we need to worry about feeling heavy right before a class?
You absolutely do. This is why the strategy part is so critical. A heavy, high-fat meal right before a class is going to lead to discomfort, especially with all the flexing, rotating, and deep breathing.
So what's the rule of thumb?
The rule of thumb is to keep your high-lipid meals distant from your session, ideally 3 to 4 hours before. If you need a little pre-workout boost right before class, you go for a small, easily digestible snack. Maybe some simple proteins or a little bit of quality fruit, but it's based entirely on your personal tolerance.
So it's another case of sensing the nuances.
Exactly. The nutrition has to follow the movement.
This all points to an approach that's experimental, humble, and strategically framed, treating the body like a partner. Which brings us to this beautiful, kind of unexpected anecdote from the sources about listening to the body's signals. Signals that go way beyond just eating.
This anecdote, it truly redefined how I think about cravings. I was going through a period where I had these intense, almost aggressive cravings for almonds. Not for the taste, but just an urge to eat 30, 40, 50 at a time. And I was already on a very high-quality diet, so I was baffled by this compulsion.
And you were probably expecting the advice to be about restriction or self-control.
That's exactly what I expected. But I spoke with a practitioner, and instead of a lecture, she just asked me, what if your body is asking for fat not through the mouth, but through the skin?
Wow. That is a novel perspective. We almost never connect what we eat with what we put on our skin.
It was revolutionary for me. She explained that in some traditional health models, the body can express a global need for lipid nourishment that's actually related to regulating the nervous system. The skin is this huge sensory organ, right?
Boy.
And nourishing it can sometimes calm a deeper internal demand, a demand for security, stability, for envelopment that our brain just mistakenly translates as a hunger craving.
So what was the practical application she recommended?
Incredibly simple. A daily conscious application of a high-quality body oil like olive or sesame oil and treating it not as a cosmetic thing but as an act of, well, corporal nutrition, an act of nervous system regulation.
And what happened to the cravings?
They diminished and disappeared completely. Without any effort or struggle, the realization was just profound. My body was claiming ingestion to fulfill a deeper need for nervous system support and security.
Which is perfectly coherent with Pilates. The whole practice is built on proprioception, contact, sensation.
It's totally coherent. It just shows that sometimes our compulsive cravings are signaling a need for regulation, not just restriction.
That's such a powerful conclusion. The whole philosophy here is that the body is a cooperative partner, not an adversary we have to control. This targeted lipid approach, it becomes a strategy for stability and durability, which is exactly what Pilates is.
At the end of the day, whether it's in our movement or our nourishment, what we're seeking is a form of embodied freedom.
Yeah.
And you get there through careful observation, consistent adaptation, and honoring the subtle, sometimes non-linear signals the body is sending us.
So what does this all mean for you? Well, the sources suggest that by stabilizing your hormonal fluctuations, especially by reducing those sharp insulin peaks, you gain this incredible energetic autonomy. You become less reactive. So consider the cravings, physical or emotional, that you experience daily. Could they be signaling a deeper need for metabolic stability instead of just simple caloric restriction? And what small quality fat replacement or even a sensory input, like that oil application, could address that underlying need for nervous system support? It's definitely food for thought. We'll see you on next Deep Dive.